Here are 10 questions that you will miss on the CCSP exam if you're not careful. Number 1. Question is, your company maintains a large amount of business data. Which task is mostly related to you protecting that data? A, discovery, or B, classification? The problem with this question is that discovery is part of the process when you're trying to protect data. You need to discover what you have. But classification is more closely related to protecting that data. So always look at the question and see if it says select the best answer, chances are there's 2 or maybe even 3 answers that kind of fit, but there's one that is more closely related to the question. So in this scenario right here is classification, because classification is something that you would do after you discovered the data already. You discovered it already, and now you need to classify it. So that's closer to getting ready to protect it. Number 2, question is, while making plans to expand the company internationally, you are in charge of researching any laws and regulations that may apply to your company. Which most accurately describes how data privacy laws are enforced in the United States? In this example, A, a set of laws for specific industries or types of data, or B, a set of state-level laws for specific types of data. The answer here is A, because the laws set are for the types of data that you are holding in your company, that you're managing or you're dealing with in your company. For example, credit card data there's a law with PCI, or with HIPAA data, there's actually erase the PCI one, because PCI is not really a law. It's more like a standard, industry standard. Around PII or HIPAA, then there are definitely laws around those to make sure that that data is protected. It wouldn't be B, because these are not state level laws we're talking about. We're talking about data inside the United States, and data inside the United States is dealt with at the federal level with HIPAA and PII, because there's federal laws passed that govern that type of data. Number 3, what is the main purpose of a SIM? Now, again, we got that select the best answer identifier right there. So there's these 2 answers going to be kind of closely related, but there's going to be one that is closer. So A says collecting and storing all event log data in a central location. And B says aggregating and correlating data in order to identify threats. Well, collecting and storing all event data in a central location is definitely what a SIM does. But the main purpose of a SIM is to aggregate and correlate that data in order to identify threats. So A is kind of what a SIM does, but B is more of the main purpose of what a SIM is. So you got to be careful and say, oh, a SIM collects data, collects and stores. But if you read the other questions, you're going to see that there's an answer that is better, that's going to be more in line with what the question's actually asking. Number 4, what is an API? So for A, you have a choice. It's a set of conventions that a server application uses to communicate with client applications, or B, a set of conventions that a client applications use to communicate with server applications. So it's just flipped around. So is it the server or is it the client that uses the application to communicate? Just remember, the server is always serving the clients. It doesn't matter if it's an API, file server, or whatever kind of web server. That's happening on the server level. The client is just consuming the API. So in this question, the answer on this one is going to be A. Number 5, what is an example of the use data lifecycle phase? So the use data lifecycle, use is a phase in the data lifecycle. When you use the data, you have 2 options here. The data is accessed by client applications, or the data is sent to a different environment. Very kind of tricky question, because using the data, you can send it and it's being used when it's being accessed. But A says the data accessed by client applications. This is more, we talk about the server and the client. So you got the server and the client, and that's when the use is actually happening. Yeah, you can send data to a different environment, but that's kind of close. You could say like you're sending it to the client, but a better answer is data accessed by client applications, definitely using the data in that scenario. So A would be the correct answer there. Number 6, your company is planning to use cloud services, and you need to know what are the building blocks that you will build the cloud environment from. Another tricky question. You think about cloud and you think about internet right off the bat. You don't think about virtual network right off the bat. So you can just kind of breeze through this and say, oh, yes, internet. But it's really virtual network. That's the answer. Just think about it. The internet's already built for you. You're building virtual networks on top of the internet. So remember, always try to find the best answer. Number 7, your company plans to store mission critical data in the cloud. The data has to be encrypted and highly available. Where should you store the encryption keys? Okay, so in this scenario, you've got data. It has to be encrypted, but it has to also be highly available, which means that you have to, if somebody wakes you up in the middle of the night, you need to get that data. You need to be able to unencrypt it. So where should you store the encryption key so that you always have access to it to make it highly available? The quickest way to get to that data would be to have the encryption key in the cloud. On premises seems almost like a good answer, but the answer here is in the cloud because you're going to have it with a cloud provider. Your data is going to be right there in the cloud, and it's just going to be easier to get it. If you have it on premises, then it's going to be hard. Then you got to upload it to the cloud or do some other kind of, or take some additional steps to try to get it up to the cloud and then decrypt the data. All right, here's another one. Number 8 about encryption. Your company is storing confidential data in the cloud. You need to keep the data as secure as possible. Where should you store the encryption keys? Okay, so you got A, in escrow with a CASB, or cloud access security broker, or B, a hardware module on premise. You would think, if you hold it in escrow, yeah, that's the safest thing because I don't have it. The cloud doesn't have, nobody has it. But to keep it as secure as possible, something could happen to the CASB. So that's going to add another layer of complexity. That's going to be another way that it can get away. If you actually have the hardware module on premise, then that's going to be the most secure because you have access to the key. Just think about it. If you had a lock, a safe full of money at your house, and you didn't want to touch it, you want to be secure, so you gave the key to an escrow company. What if the escrow company went out of business and they say, "Oh, we don't have a key. We forgot. We don't know what happened to it. We had so many keys." That's not going to be as secure as you actually having it on your person, having it yourself. Next one's number 9. When dealing with what type of information is it legally mandatory to report if there's a breach involved in it? The key word here is legally. That means that we're dealing with laws. You can quickly look at this and say, oh, I'm under contract to report a breach. Yeah, you're under contract to report a breach, but you don't legally have to do it unless it is regulated data. And regulated data is HIPAA data or PII or something of that nature. So if you just quickly go through these questions, you can get tricked, but just make sure you read it and think about it a little bit more deeply to see what the identifying word is in the question. So in this one is legally mandatory. And number 10, what is the relationship between a container and its host? This one is a little tricky because there's different schools of thought on containers and host and does it have to match and whatever. The options you have here are the container OS must match the host OS, or Linux-based containers can run on a Windows-based host. The answer here is B, because although it is sometimes better to run Linux-based containers on Linux-based hosts because you have the underlying Linux kernel that you can rely on, but that kind of defeats the whole purpose between containers and hosts because it should be that you have that container contained. It shouldn't be accessing the actual host. And some people believe that containers need to run on the same or similar host because the container is a stripped down OS and it may need the core kernel, but this is not true because when you install the container, it creates a Linux or Windows OS behind the scenes as an independent virtual machine on the host that you're running it from anyway. So you don't really need to have matching OSs on the container or on the host. So that's it for 10 questions that you will miss on a CCSP exam if you're not careful. Like, share, and subscribe if you want to see more videos about this topic. Thanks for watching.